Hello, everyone. The learning this week is sponsored by Thera and Sam Swirsky in loving memory of Janet Lippman. And today we're starting the second last chapter. Originally, I said that there was 24, 25 chapters like there is in the Talmud, but Rabbi Melamed divided a few categories to subcategories, and so there are 30 chapters. So this will be a little bit of a review, but more particularly about what Eruv really is. So as we learned in chapter 21, one may transport items on Shabbat within a private domain, Reshut Yachid, but not more than 4 amot, approximately 6 feet, within a public domain, Reshut HaRabim, and not from a public to a private domain, and vice versa. So there's three terms that use the word Eruvin in our liturgy. They're actually, I think all three are in the Siddur. So Eruv Chatzarot is what we're talking about, which literally means to merge different semi-public domains. So the way that houses and neighborhoods used to be built in the times of the Mishnah and the Talmud was that basically there was one main street, like you see in the old movies about the United States, and then from each one of these streets would go into like a yard that had it in itself 7 or 8 houses approximately, with a well in the middle of the yard, and that yard itself could have been closed with a gate and basically secluding them from the rest of the world. So, but still in that yard where there's 7 or 8 different houses or families, the rabbis explained how to make that yard a private domain for the purpose of the people in that yard. That's what we are going to talk about today. The other two eruvin that are common in halacha, one is more than the other, is eruv tavshilin, literally mixing or merging cooked food. So when Shabbat follows a Yantiv, then we aren't allowed to cook, of course, on Yantiv for Shabbat. But if we cook something before Yantiv that will be used on Shabbat, and the custom is to eat it at Shalashudas at the third meal, then we are basically saying, "Blessed are you, Hashem, who commanded us to." Who command us to make the Eruv Tavshilin, which means that now I'm able to light candles on Friday night, and I'm able to cook on Yantiv, even if it's later in the day. In Israel, it can happen when Rosh Hashanah is Thursday and Friday, and outside of Israel, almost every Yantiv could have this situation. And the last, which is maybe the rarest, is Eruv Tchumin, which means that if there's two settlements, two towns very close to each other, but there's more than 1,500 feet between them, then we are able to put food before Shabbat in a middle spot between the two towns, and when the people want to go from one to the other, they stop at that place and eat the food that was left there, and that way it becomes now their new domain, and go on. I remember that when we were in the Gaza Strip, there were two moshavim, two settlements that were very close to each other, and we were invited to a bris on Shabbat morning. So it was after the service, and they waited for us to come, and so we stopped on the way and ate, I think, crackers and some other stuff that is not perishable. And that's important for us to learn also about why we want it to be non-perishable, because then it might get lost. So, an Eruv, however, transforms a Reshut Rabim into a Reshut Yachid, thus allowing people to transport items within that area without limit, as well as to transport items from homes and yards into that area, and vice versa. So an Eruv has two components, one pertaining to the area that will be transformed into a private domain, and the other relating to the people who will live within the Eruv's boundaries. In order to define the area as a single private domain, it must be enclosed by a fence. However, this is not enough. The people who live within the area must also establish a partnership with one another. So later in this chapter, we're going to learn about what happens if you have a non-Jewish person living in that neighborhood. How do you allow him to be in partnership with you, because they don't care about carrying or not carrying in a public domain. So this is done by means of 2 meals worth of food that is owned collectively by everyone and from which anyone may partake. There's a beautiful story in Kosuch Menu, which I wasn't able to find, but I will try to find it by tomorrow, which is that there was a fight between two families that were living in one of these courtyards, and they weren't talking to each other, and so the child of one of the families basically appealed to the parents, if we don't make peace with them, we will not be able to have this eruv in our courtyard, and I won't be able to play with my other friends in the courtyard on Shabbat. And so he was asked, if I remember the story correctly, he was asked to go and collect the food from the neighbors in order to make this eruv, and that's how peace was brought back to that neighborhood. And so when it says 2 meals, it reminds us a little bit of the Shalach Manos for Purim, that it has to be two different kinds of food, but also the amount. So it doesn't have to really be two kinds of food. What is most common today is to have matzah left in the synagogue in the neighborhood, and of course the Tzurat HaPetach, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So this communal food is called an eruv, literally merging, because it merges or joins together all the homes and yards, turning them into a single private domain. Nevertheless, it has become commonplace to call the enclosure itself an eruv as well, and we follow this convention. So, tachlis, as I say, as we learned, there is a difference between a Reshut HaRabim by Torah law and a semi-public domain Carmelit, which is treated as a Reshut HaRabim by rabbinic law. In order to permit carrying in a Reshut HaRabim by Torah law, the area must be enclosed by a wall or fence at least 10 tefachim high, approximately 3 feet, and the gates that people use to enter the enclosure must be locked at night. So that's because of security, but it also proves that this is now a secluded and enclosed area. However, a Carmelit, considered a public domain on the rabbinic level, need not be enclosed by an actual fence. Rather, it is sufficient to surround it with a Tzurat HaPetach, defined in the following Halacha, which literally means the shape of a doorway. And so that's why we have 2 poles and a string that connects them on top. And there's also what's called a lechi that we have to attach to the poles. So we're not going to get into that now. It's just that the idea of making this in maybe invisible wall, we actually talked about a little bit in Rashi yesterday at the very end of verse 14. It says achte and aske, which means going onto the altar and going off the altar. And so there's a term in Masechet Eruvin called, and also in Sukkah, gud achit, which means that and gud asik, which means that the walls, even if they're shorter than just below 3 feet, can still go higher. But the halacha for Eruvin is that it needs to be at least a meter high, which I believe is a little bit more than 3 feet, and then the walls are as if they are completely enclosed all the way to heaven. And also the distance between the 2 poles must not be 15 feet, because then people don't recognize that it looks like a doorway. There is no doorway in the world, as far as I know, that is 15 feet wide, and so that's why there has to be measurements. And again, but the actual idea of the eruv is this idea that we are all able to eat from this food. And so what we do today, because we don't want to worry about it every single week, is once a year, the rabbi of the community basically makes sure that the string is checked, I believe, every week. But they make sure that there's a fresh box of matzah in the synagogue that technically belongs to everybody. And so that's what allows us to have this eruv. And we'll stop here and open up for questions.